Okay. So ifs, what is ifs? Ifs is the better way of writing a logical formula. A logical formula is an if statement. Now, if has been around probably since Excel started, and it's a very simple formula that can add tremendous value to your analysis. If allows us to be able to conditionally do things if a particular criteria is met. Okay, in a traditional if formula, we have three operators. Okay, so we have our logical test, which will typically be some sort of arithmetic operation or Boolean test where if inventory equals 500, do this. If inventory falls below 500, do this, so on and so forth. Let's just go ahead and write a simple example here. So we're going to say inventory level. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and say it is 500. So let's go ahead and write an if statement traditionally where we would evaluate that 500 and see if we can come up with something pretty cool with it. And let's go ahead and see if we can return back a value. So we're going to go ahead and say equals if cell D11 equals 500. Actually, let's say if it is greater than or equal to 500, return back the message. Return back the message, inventory level okay. Okay, and if not, return back too low, reorder. Like this. Okay. Oops, and what are we doing there? Oh, we're missing a double quote. There we go. There we go. So inventory level is 500. That works. If we go ahead and put it to 499, we'll say too low, reorder. And it looks like we got an extra. Oh, right here, we got an extra thing in that. Let's see, why is that? Sometimes when you do this on the fly, it gets a little upset with you. Why don't you like that? No, I just want you to do. Let's just do it like that. There we go. Too low, reorder. Okay, so if this was 500, fine, okay. 501, okay, so on and so forth. Well, what happens if we need to test maybe not just one level of conditions, but a second level of conditions or a third level of conditions? Well, the traditional if statements limits are quite strict. What we would end up doing here is writing what we would call a nested if statement, where in the false section of the if statement, we would go ahead and write a second or third or fourth or fifth. We can actually have up to 64 levels of nested if, where these formulas would essentially repeat into each other until it finds a true statement. But what ended up happening with this is that for this particular formula, you would end up with just a very, very, very convoluted, difficult formula to be able to operate with and being able to use. The reason being is that you would end up with all these levels of if inside of it, and it would become very slow, and debugging this, troubleshooting this would become quite difficult in terms of being able to work, because you'd end up with, if you went into your function argument explorer here, just so many levels that, finding the correct thing sometimes could be very difficult. And in fact, it often was. So ifs, on the other hand, is kind of a new way that we can write a formula for a logical expression. And what's awesome about this is that it doesn't take away from if in the slightest. So if we still want to use if, we absolutely can. If we want to use the same functionality in ifs, like an if statement, we totally can as well. Let me show you what I mean by this. So I've got a very simple example here, and I'm almost treating this ifs like a lookup formula, okay? And so what we're doing here is that we're evaluating where the formula is, in this case where the city is, and if it matches a criteria, go ahead and return back that particular value. So as an example here, let's go ahead and clear this out, just make this, and we'll write this on its own. So clear contents, and let's just go ahead and write this one again. Okay. And what we want to do here is we want to look up the city name and then return back the appropriate zip code for that particular city. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and say, let's call this one up here zip code. And we're going to go ahead and say ifs. And then we're going to go ahead and start testing something. Now, the big difference between ifs and if is that ifs only tests to see if something's true. You just write a whole bunch of true statements inside of this. So we're going to say ifs B2 equals Atlanta. Okay, return back 30303, which is the zip code for Metro Atlanta area. And in fact, it does. It returns back 30303. If we go to the next row here, you'll see it returns pound NA. Now, what ifs does is it evaluates a list of parameters here, and then it just tries to find a true value, or the first true value it finds. If there's several true values in there, it just returns back the first one. But we don't write a not statement. We don't write a not true statement, a false statement. If it doesn't match, it basically returns back NA. Where else do we see NA? Well, we typically see NA in what? A lookup formula. And that's kind of what ifs is. It's a lookup formula, but for a logical expression. So we can evaluate something, and if it comes back true, return back some sort of value. Now, we can wrap this in a is NA or an if NA or an if error in the event that we get a false statement so that we can do something different with it. And I'll show you that here in a moment. Now, in this first example, what we're looking at is just a single test, if it's equal to Atlanta 30303. Let's go ahead and try this again, and let's throw in a second one. What we're doing here is we're writing these in what we would call key value pair. So the first one would be the first thing, the key, and then the second would be the value. And so we're going to test if B2 equals, in this case, Bakersfield. Okay, and if it's Bakersfield, return back, I don't know what their zip is, but let's just say it's 90210. Okay, so you'll notice that even though we have that second value in here, it's still returning Atlanta. Why? Because Atlanta is the first expression, and it stops there. It's true. If we copy this down to the next one, we see that 90210 is added. And again, if we go to that third, the fourth, and the fifth, because those additional values aren't listed. So most of the time, we're just wanting to check to see if something's true or not, and if so, do something conditionally. And that's where ifs, in my opinion, really shines. And so it's a great way of writing a logical formula without having to create a whole bunch of additional work, and without having to create a whole bunch of additional nested if statements to support it. Now, one of the things you could do is you could wrap this in an if-error formula, which is a wonderful formula that you can choose to use in the event that you have an error do something differently. So that pound NA that we see here as an example, that's an example of an error. And so what we could do with the if error is that if an error occurs, do something differently. So as an example, instead of having that nasty pound NA, let's just copy this down one more just so we can keep that error message there. Okay, we could do something differently. Now, if error is a wrapping formula. It goes in front of whatever formula you do, and it's a great catch-all. So, if the formula doesn't work, do something different. If the formula does work, display whatever that value should have been. So as long as it doesn't error, you'll never see the if-error formula value. But if it does error, it gives you the opportunity to do something different. So I could write in, for example, a not in list value. Oops, one extra parentheses there. Okay. And instead of getting that pound NA, we get that not in list. And I hope you can see it. That, in my opinion, looks a lot cleaner. Now, we could choose to do something different. We could instead of saying not in list, we could just go ahead and do two double quotes like that, and it would display nothing at all. So that is your ifs statement, and ifs is a wonderful way of being able to write a very comprehensive logical formula without having to do a whole bunch of nested if statements inside of it. And you can use it really kind of anywhere inside of Excel where you would normally write your if statement. You can just go ahead and write that ifs and avoid that additional work of those nested functions.